A very, very good evening. A warm welcome to Dan Really Likes Wine, brought to you by Norman Goodfellows. And welcome to a very bubbly edition of Dan Really Likes Wine, because this coming Sunday is International, Global, Intergalactic, Interplanetary Cap Classique Day, which will be celebrated wildly in small corners of South Africa and hopefully one or two others around the world. I jest, I think it'll be celebrated quite widely because of all of the categories of wine that we have indulged in over the 8 years of Dan Really Likes Wine. I think it would be hard to find any that has progressed quite as much as Cap Classique has, both in terms of the sheer quality, but also just the whole strength of the category. The fact that there are now not just one or two, but a number of producers who make nothing but Cap Classique, who revel in creating bubbles and doing so majestically and not bothering about anything else at all. And also that there are bubbles at the very top end, our premium selection, that are, I won't say giving champagne a run for its money in terms of style, because I think we now understand that champagne and Cap Classique, while made the same way, do sit in their own individual categories. But there is now no longer the, okay, if I want to get the very best of effervescent, I must have something with a French name I can't quite pronounce properly. I think people are seeing Cap Classique as not merely, okay, well, I can't quite afford that bottle of champagne, so I'll go with a Cap Classique instead, but rather very proudly celebrating South Africa and knowing that when they're buying the best of South African bubbles, they're getting something exceptional. And so when this Sunday unfolds, and bubbles is a great partner for breakfast, this is a category you should be cheering on and thoroughly enjoying. Your only challenge is that there's just so much to choose from in South Africa at the moment, from the style, from the regions, and from the varietals, because while Chardonnay and Pinot Noir are still by and large the main acts in the majority of our premium versions, there are people who are bringing out other varietals and doing so really well, whether it's a Silverthorn bringing out some Colombar that's drinking delightfully, Ken Forrester, no surprise, making bubbles out of Chenin Blanc. There are people doing some really, really interesting stuff. And we get to celebrate that today. We get to celebrate with four women, well, it is August after all, who are making some particularly good bubbles in South Africa. And I look forward to not just celebrating them and the bubbles they make, but also getting their take on where we are. Am I being overly optimistic about how well bubbles are doing? I don't think so. I think they'll agree with me, but I'm very excited to find out with four star guests on this week's edition of Dan Really Likes Wine, brought to you by Norman Goodfellows. All that's coming in just a moment. Before that, though, let's have a quick look at some wine news. Well, this is the Dan Really Likes Wine selection. New ones out every single month. We've had some really interesting stuff in the Dan Really Likes Wine selection in the 2 months to date. You can see some of the producers on there, people like Craven, Erica Obermeyer, Jasper out at Swever, the Mullineaux, some really cool stuff from Gerard Holden. That's his Semillon. Every time I give it to anybody, they are blown away. The Pilgrim wines, that's Henriette Mulderbosch, his supposedly a sideline, but it's becoming an increasingly prominent part of the wine offering he gives. The Great Art range that is made out at Mullineaux, but Guy Fredericks oversees that wine that supports the community. And each month, what I do is I sift through my list of contacts and find people who are making red or making white that I feel is a little older, a little unique, a varietal you might not have heard of or know so well. Wine that's made in small quantities. Last month we had Peter also with just 200 bottles in total. So we bought the lot and thought, right, well, this will be a great addition. And so if you like wine, if you're adventurous, if you want to discover stuff that is new and find an Albarino or find a Colombar or find a blend that you've not come across or a winemaker you've heard of but never tried or a region that you didn't even know they made wine in, then this is the box for you. The whites are 1,500 rand a month. The reds 1,800. Those are through Norman Goodfellows. Get both if you like wines of all varieties. And I promise you that even if you don't absolutely adore every one of them, you will discover something fascinating about wine. And I can tell you, I spent a lot of time in getting these together. So hopefully what you discover in your box puts a smile on your face. Load up, sign up at the Norman Goodfellows website and indulge in the Dan Really Likes Wine selection. This is the Cape Winemakers Guild. It is hovering on the horizon. 22nd of August, the Cape Town tasting. And that's at the Cape Town International Convention Centre. On the 27th, there is the Pretoria tasting, followed that evening by the Winemaker's Bride. This is a very festive occasion. Winemakers do like to let their hair down, and this is certainly the case in Pretoria at the Bride. That's the 27th. And then the day after, there might be one or two slightly tired-looking winemakers by that stage. The 2024 Cape Winemakers Guild with Nedbank turns up at Nedbank. It'll be in the atrium. It's a beautiful space. And again, your chance to run through all of the wines that will be on auction just a few weeks later at the annual Cape Winemakers Guild auction, supported by Nedbank. Again, some terrific wines. We'll look at those in a bit more detail closer to the auction itself. This is one of the great tastings of the year. If there are tickets left, and they were very thin on the ground last time I checked, get them quickly, get along. You're guaranteed some exceptional tasting at the selection of events. And then Mont Rochelle, this is the 3rd of September. This will be at Norman Goodfellows in Fourways. The store is beautiful, and it makes for a very, very entertaining evening. The winemaker joins you, a selection of wine, and particularly if it's a brand like Mont Rochelle, it's a little more bespoke, a little smaller, not one everybody knows. There's a link to a rather well-known English entrepreneur that will become apparent on the night. I love the wine, I love the hotel, I just love the space that it finds itself in Franschhoek, just on the right-hand side as you come in Main Road, sweeping up to the valley. And this is your chance to get an understanding of the wines of Mont Rochelle. And as always the case, get some at a really, really good rate and walk home with your cellar good to be stocked. So that's the 3rd of September. Tickets available at Norman Goodfellows, 100 rand. That money all goes to charity. And in turn, you get snacks for the evening, but more importantly, great wine and a great wine education. All right, that brings us to my education for today. And it is a permanent joy of hosting this show that I never walk away from it without having learned a fair amount about one wine or another. And today, my education focuses around the art of bubbles. And as I said at the start of the show, a space that I'm really, really excited to see the evolution of here in South Africa. And I've got 4 high professors to guide me through my latest lessons. So let's welcome on our bubble teams. They come from Khulu Fine Wines and from Pieter Ferreira Wines and from Genevieve and also from Dainty Bess. So to Jane Ferreira-Eedes, to Kwanele, to Melissa Nelsen and Ann Ferreira. Guys, welcome all of you. Lovely to have you on the show and to see you all for a celebration, which is an apt word when discussing bubbles. And you are basically the driving force behind Pieter Ferreira. I don't think actually makes any of his own wine. I have a strong suspicion you do all of this for him and produce it. The Ferreira family is very much invested in bubbles. I said at the start of the show that I feel as much, if not more than anything, over the 8 years now that we've had the show, bubbles in South Africa has been the space I've seen take the biggest leap forward. Is that a fair assessment, Ann Ferreira?
Oh, absolutely. And all those points that you mentioned. No. So in 2012, Peter sat down with me and we suddenly realized that he was going to be retired relatively soon, which is next year. And we kind of went, what's he going to do without bubbly? And what am I going to do with him if he hasn't got bubbly? So we set about creating our own brand, which belongs to me, which in theory makes Pieter my property. And we set about trying to make the best version of a Cap Classique in South Africa. And interestingly enough, as you said, over the past 8 years, if not more, Cap Classique is the biggest growing brand or SKU in South Africa of all the wines that we do produce. So it's wonderful to see that the quality is improving, the fact that people are starting to understand it, buy it as an alternative, seeing the sunshine in our wines.
There are two spaces for me, Anne, that I think require a particular assessment in terms of that improvement that I've seen. And again, this is very much the amateur wine drinking outsider speaking. From a winemaker's perspective at a premium level, that very conscious understanding that we're not trying to make champagne, we're making Cap Classique. We do that very well, but we don't need to copy somebody else, just as Hemelanada doesn't have to try and be Burgundy. And the second of those is the difference in the understanding of consumers, that again, we're not trying to buy something that's approximating champagne. We're buying something that is really, really good on its own terms. How important have those two pieces of the landscape been in shifting Cap Classique forward?
Oh, Dan, I think vital. I mean, we would like to be the best alternative to champagne. In fact, we'd like people to buy us, full stop, and then maybe buy champagne on another day when they're in Champagne in France. So the fact that we are individual, that we're creating great quality from great vineyard sites, from great areas all over the Western Cape is pivotal. And then, of course, the magic we have, which I think the Champenois haven't had, but are going to be looking at in the future, is we have the sunshine. So it makes a huge difference to our wines, to our vineyards, the ripeness, and just the beauty and purity that we're finding in Cap Classiques in South Africa.
You have this very much in your veins between yourself and Pieter, but you're not the only Ferreira on the show with a dab hand at creating Cap Classique. Jane, talk me through the relationship with Anne, because you two are rather close.
We are quite close. Anne is my cousin, so Pieter is luckily married into the Ferreira family indirectly for him. But yes, Anne's my cousin on my father's side of the family, and she married Pieter, who also happens to be a Ferreira. So a lot of coincidence and with the names. But yeah, it's that's the relationship. First cousins.
And you're very much in the thick of wine family, because that chiseled and roguishly good-looking character who flitted across the background of the screen a moment ago was Christian Eads. So there is wine all around you. What was it that got you into the wine world? Was it the family? Was it the good fortune of winning the heart of Christian? How did you fall into the wine world?
No, it was definitely not through Christian. It was more from the family side. I grew up in Wellington, which is in the heart of the Boerland. And my father loved wine. He used to be an airline pilot, and he traveled often to the Cape and visited wine farms, and had a love affair with wine, and specifically Pinot Noir. So yeah, growing up in the winelands, it kind of was a very natural progression, obviously, and as well was in the field of wine and wine marketing. So yeah, it was a fairly natural progression. And actually, Christian I met at a wine tasting group many years ago. It was a bunch of young people called Not the Noble Rot Lot, and we thought we were all very clever. But yeah, that's how we met.
And that gave you the platform to decide to get into wine. I know you've got a few different spaces that you work in, but for the purposes of today, Dainty Bess is very much the focus. How did that come about? Were there various thoughts on various wines you might make, or was it always, given the family history, going to be bubbles that you nudged towards?
It's quite a story. As I said, my father loved wine, and my parents had a small holding in Wellington. And there was a small area of the farm. It wasn't really a farm, it was tiny. So about a quarter of a hectare of land that they didn't know what to do with. My mother created a really spectacular garden. And my dad planted about a quarter hectare of Pinot Noir. So initially we made wine from it. The vineyard was planted on some quite nice sort of soils with lots of clay, and but it was obviously Wellington, quite a hot area, but on the south side of a mountain, so fairly sheltered. So we initially sort of made a little bit of Pinot Noir, but the very, very small volumes, quantities were just really for our own hobby, sort of a hobbyist project. And then Pieter and Ann we're quite a big family, and often would be sort of gathered together for very big sort of family lunches at my parents' home in Wellington. And Pieter and Ann were there one day, and we were sort of coming to the end of making Pinot Noir, and I think Pieter took one look at a vineyard of Pinot Noir and said, well, you know, we can't do nothing. And he suggested we make some bubbly from this single vineyard block. So that's how it started. Pieter helped us make the wine at the Grahambeck cellar, and we just mainly just enjoy the wine ourselves. We sort of sold it to friends and family. My mother we used to have an open garden, and my mom used to we used to serve bubbly with scones and strawberries and cream, which is really lovely. It's still one of my favorite combinations with the bubbly, with Dainty Bess specifically. And then it evolved. We started looking at other vineyards. Friends of ours in Elgin had some excess Pinot, so we bought a little bit extra from them. And so it became a sort of a Wellington Elgin blend at that point. And then in 2016, my parents decided that Wellington was far too big and busy for them, and they decided to move somewhere smaller. And at that point, there were some changes in the Grahambeck, and Pieter was no longer able to help us with production. So I bought the business from my parents, and I continued to make it under the label Dainty Bess, which is named after a rose from my mom's garden.
It's a lovely story, and I love how it has evolved and how it has come to be. As I love the story of Khulu Fine Wines. And Kwanele Nyawo, it's lovely to have you back on the show. It's been a little while since we caught up. What have been the latest adventures in a brand that I have a suspicion is giving you a great deal of joy, but also giving you a bit of work as well?
Hi, Dan. I'm happy to be back on the show. It's been a while. Khulu, my goodness. What an adventure. It's been probably our busiest year yet. And our bestseller is our Izigidi MCC. And now that we're moving closer to springtime, there's more events and there's more things that need to be done, you know, preparing for springtime and all the events and sales and things like that. But Khulu has really been an adventure. And I mean, today's show really excites me. I am on a panel with some women that I admire. I love their MCCs. I love your show too, sorry. But it's been a blessing. And it's also been a lot of work, lots of sleepless nights, lots of long days. And I think people think if you're in the alcohol industry, all you do is go to events and meet nice people, but that's not the be all and end all of it. So lots of joy, but lots of hard work as well when it comes to building a brand, especially for myself, who does not come from a wine background particularly.
You had a dream that I think many people share in a very flippant, offhand way. Oh, I'd love to have my own wine one day. Wouldn't it be fun? I'll have endless bottles and have my friends round, and it'll be an absolute delight. And again, I have no doubt there has been delight, but there is so much more to it than just sitting around on a Sunday and enjoying some nice bottles that have got your name on. If you think back to when this all started and then move forward to today, what are the biggest challenges for you, and what are the biggest lessons that you feel you've learned doing all of this?
I think the biggest lesson that I've had to learn is that, sure, my friends are going to kill me for this one, but your friends do not necessarily translate into your clients. When you start up, yes, they will support you. They'll buy a bottle or two or a case if you're lucky. But as your business grows, you realize that your friends can't keep buying your wine every month. So you need to find new ways and new clientele. And the biggest challenge has been expanding our footprint, into retail and restaurants. Us being a small brand means we do not have a big marketing budget to spend on things like events, marketing, advertising, etc. So those have been the biggest challenges for me personally. But yeah, it's work at the end of the day, and it's a challenge that we are overcoming slowly but surely. And we have seen a great amount of growth and a new range of clients. So that's been good.
I'm going to come back a little later on the show just to get some nuts and bolts on the detail of where the brand is now. But if I ask you for the challenge, I must also ask you for the reward. What has put the biggest smile on your face to date in this Khulu journey?
I think the biggest smile was us doing a tasting, a series of tastings on the Blue Train over a period of 6 days. That was the best. Growing up, the Blue Train was always on my bucket list, and being able to jump on the Blue Train with a few cases of my wine and being able to interact with people of different walks of life, that was the brightest star. That was the biggest highlight for us, definitely.
I think that's been a very, very cool one. And I'm sure there'll be others. And I want to come back to you and get a state of play on Khulu. Let's jump over to Genevieve. And I actually had some of your bubbles, I think it was 2 weeks ago at Masha and Stellenbosch. They didn't last very long, but that's not unusual when I have your wine. Melissa, lovely to have you back on the show. When you heard the words a moment ago of the Khulu brand story, did that strike a chord? Or are you thinking, yep, I've been there, and perhaps to some degree I still am there with my brand?
Hi, Dan. Yeah, totally. And yeah, glad you tried the rosé at Mercia. They're pairing it with as a starter with strawberry jam and bread. So I think that's a winning mix. But yeah, I smiled quite a bit when listening to the Khulu story. We've all been there, and Jane, and I think most wine producers. But the joy and the rewards that come from that, they carry over month to month. The Genevieve journey is also, I started or released my first vintage in 2010, and you keep your head down so often, and when you do stand up and you look around, you do realize that you have come quite a far way, and it's a pleasure to see other people drinking Genevieve and mentioning it. And my greatest achievement, I always feel, and it's still to this day, is I see someone drinking a bottle of Genevieve and I didn't sell it to them personally, and I think, wow, we're getting there.
It's a common trait with so many of our winemakers. They are far too humble. You've got wine that's got a very, very large following, but it's not always, when you start a brand, an easy following to attract. One of the things that I think will have helped somebody like you is that word does spread, Melissa, when a brand has got it right. And particularly with bubbles, I've got friends who drink little else, and the moment they found something new, like, oh, have you tried the Genevieve? It is fantastic. How much have you seen the broad increase in domestic appreciation for premium bubbles in South Africa help to lift your brand?
I think it's grown substantially. I'm just amazed how, when I first started out, one of my greatest stories is I produced a zero dosage in 2012, which I released in 2015. And I was so excited about it, understanding the background to a zero dosage and there's no dosage, no sugar added to the end product. I was so excited to show the public. And what got me the most was that people weren't, they didn't know what that was. They were thinking it's zero alcohol. And I realized I had to go, stand outside of the wine industry where we talk wine all the time because that's our love and our passion. But to get outside and see what the consumer was doing and what they were wanting to learn. So it's been great to understand what the public want, but also to see how the public's taste for Cap Classique has grown tremendously. It's such a joy to see people now ask me when is the next Zero Dosage coming out because they understand it, and just to see that knowledge has come about. And as you were saying, people go to dinner and they're only drinking bubbly these days, and I think that the style of the South African Cap Classique is also, it's a very enjoyable wine. It's made, one of the things when Ann was talking about, which came up for me, is the purity in Cap Classique. And I think a lot of us producers have got that right, that when people are drinking bubbles, South African bubbles, there's that purity that shines through. And it works well with food. And so that for me has been just lovely to see the growth in that. And just South African taste has evolved tremendously.
There are going to be a number of people watching the show for whom not everything in the winemaking story is always well known. And that's an important part of what we do. I learn new stuff every week. And so although it refers to my favorite style, I will ask you in very simple terms, Melissa, for those people going, Zero Dosage, what does that mean? I've never heard of that. Is that fat-free, sugar-free, alcohol-free? What's the zero for? Can you give us a quick sketch out as to what Zero Dosage means?
Sure. So Zero Dosage is a Cap Classique made with zero sugar added in the final product. So it's basically a naked wine. It's also called a Brut Nature. So it's really expressing the wine truly and putting it on show of where the grape is from and what kind of varietal you're showing. So not a very prominent Zero Dosage in South Africa, but there are quite a few producers that are now starting to produce that as well, which is lovely. People are enjoying it and then enjoying the drier style, because obviously with no sugar added, it's going to be extra crispy, and that acidity is going to show beautifully.
As I say, it is one of my favorite interpretations of Cap Classique or champagne, when the liqueur d'expédition, as my WSET lecturers would tell me, contains no added sugar. And Melissa, one who's got it particularly right. And hopefully we'll have some more of it coming out soon. Back to Jane and to the Dainty Bess. The understanding that the South African wine audience has, that you find, Jane, in terms of going beyond just it is a bottle of bubbles, to what degree do you think the wine drinker in the street who buys the category, whether it's bubbles, knows not just the different styles, be they Zero Dosage to demi-sec, but also what they're made for, made from, and whether a Colombar or a Chenin is something that's being picked up when people are buying bubbles?
I think there's a lot of work to be done in terms of educating people about how nuanced Cap Classique can be. I think there's a lot of people just look at the very simple things like the price, often it's the color, and they're buying from the supermarket, and there's just so much more depth in Cap Classique. I mean, I think we've got a couple of producers in South Africa who are really focusing on category and making exceptional wines. Obviously, for me, the Romley's aging is crucial, and it just gives so much more texture and weight in the wines. And then obviously you've got various levels of sugar, just many different styles and different grape varieties. So I think that to expect the public to understand all that, I think we've got to really sort of raise our game in terms of how we communicate about Cap Classique, and that's absolutely no hardship for me. And I know Anne also enjoys getting out there and doing tastings and that sort of thing. So I think obviously South African Cap Classique has got so much scope, and we're at the very beginning of a long future journey, and it's very exciting. And I think we have all the tools in place to actually really only improve, and it's a wonderful category to work in because people love bubbly, and it's so satisfying and rewarding to see people enjoying new styles and different styles, and understanding that why it's different. It's gone into the winemaking process that makes it different, and how that is then they go and look for that style or similar complex styles when they're shopping.
I want to dial that down into the Johannesburg market. I think when we spoke last, we spoke in particular about this wave of demi-sec love that was sweeping Johannesburg. It's been a driving force for many producers. And you look at people like Krona, who not that long ago never thought of a demi-sec, and now I think I've got two of them. Night Nectar, the space that we speak to, or Nectar, so often in South Africa. Is Nectar still a driving force? Are we seeing a broader appreciation? What is the powerhouse Johannesburg bubbles market looking like from a Khulu perspective?
Personally, I do feel that the demi-sec market is huge, and it's growing. A lot of people do like your demi-sec, your Nectar, and I find that in the Johannesburg space especially, there is quite a big crowd that prefers demi-sec and Nectar. At Khulu, we only have a Blanc de Blanc. At this point in time, a demi-sec is definitely something that we are looking at exploring, because we have seen that in the Johannesburg market, that is definitely something that the crowds like. There's a lot of people that do enjoy a demi-sec. I did like a demi-sec as well many, many years ago in my younger years, but I think as I've grown older, my palate likes my bubbly a little more dry.
Well, you and I sit in the same space there. It is a juggle as all of these tastes come together. We've got to work out where we decide to work on. What is the real focus at the moment for Khulu? Where are you finding the sweet spot is? What's really delivering?
I beg your pardon, Dan. Sorry, couldn't hear you properly.
No problem. In terms of where Khulu is at the moment, where is the sweet spot? Where do you find the wines really hitting home? What's being the most successful space for you at the moment?
The most successful space for us has definitely been exhibitions and wine shows. That is an incredible space for us because there's many people who've never heard of the brand, and I always enjoy interacting with our prospective clients in person. Then they get to meet the face behind the brand, and they understand the story behind Khulu, what it means, Izigidi, which means millions in Zulu because of the millions of bubbles that you find in a bottle of MCC. So the events, the expos, that is definitely a sweet spot. The tastings are always great, and we love exhibitions because we get to show off and we get to tell people about who we are. And the nice thing is that they get to meet you and they get to taste your bubbly at the same time. Whereas in other instances, for example, in retail, they see your bottle on a shelf, but they've never tasted it before. So they may be a little reluctant to try your bubbly. So exhibitions and events are definitely our sweet spots.
What about for you, Melissa? The brand is growing. You say very self-effacingly that you love seeing a bottle that you haven't sold individually. But how are you most effectively taking this brand out into market, getting it beyond your immediate circle of Facebook friends, and getting people in different parts of the country, different parts of the world to understand and appreciate just what a fabulous product you have?
I think we're doing two things. In 2017, I finally managed to buy a farm here in Bottrava, and we renovated a barn and converted that into a tasting room. And it's beautiful to have people come to the farm, see the Genevieve vision, see what we're doing on the farm, see an actual vineyard that is, those grapes will be in the bottle that people will taste in the following years. So just to create that. Just that true feeling of where we're coming from has been so important to to make that connection. And then branching out into international markets, I think it's been quite important to create international brand recognition for the Genevieve product range. It's just it's been interesting. If selling wine overseas doesn't mean that you're selling your entire stock overseas. It's just to create. I think we're at the stage now that you put your eggs in different baskets, and to see that what your wine tastes like in America, for example, which is a growing market, and it's also a market that is open to learning, especially with Cap Classique. So it's interesting to target markets for me that are interested in the Cap Classique range as a totality of what we are producing from South Africa. But yeah, those are the two most important ones that I'm targeting at the moment.
I love the fact that you mentioned that international space, because it leads into something I wanted to ask anyway, Anne, and that's about this collective effort. We talk about Champagne and Cap Classique, for me, not competing, but sitting in parallel spaces. And the Champagne name, well, you have one bottle and you're supporting all the others because it's a category everybody knows around the world. How far down the road are we in getting Cap Classique into that kind of space? And how closely are our producers in South Africa working together to push that even further forward?
So I think it's growing with leaps and bounds, and we've actually got a very strong association. It was started 30 years ago, but it seems to have gathered more momentum recently, called the CCPA, Cap Classique Producers Association. So they work closely together. One of the most important things they do is they actually have a base wine tasting every year after harvest, where they sit and taste each other's base wines. You can have up to 60 or 70 base wines. Together, comment, give constructive criticism, advice, and I think that's been a very positive learning curve for everybody. There's a technical tasting every 2 years, and I think we all understand the importance of collective. No man is an island, and Cap Classique will only succeed if your neighbor is succeeding and if you're supporting each other. And in fact, I think I can talk for Pieter, who travels a lot. It's one of his problems is that there are not enough larger brand Cap Classiques on the market in the international market. So it's quite a lonely road, but it's very nice when you can show people alternatives and why it's so great.
And one of the alternatives to the way we consume Cap Classique, and it's something I don't think we do enough of, is to do so in the company of great food. Jane, understanding in South Africa of Cap Classique as more than just let's have a toast before dinner or raise a glass to a major event or a celebration or something to cheers to. Are we getting a bit better at this? Are we realizing just how much potential Cap Classique really does have for food pairing?
Yeah, I think it's still very much a case of pairing, having it as an aperitif or with a starter or the canapé. But I'm seeing quite often now people are using it for pairing options with their desserts, which is quite fun. It's very versatile, and I think we also have plenty of scope to kind of develop that. I like looking at the sort of evolution of wine in the bottle as well and how that changes the taste. I think I've had some amazing sort of magnums.
That's funny.
Been released after with a bit of bottle age, and that they develop a lot of richness.
From our side,
and,
if you could manage,
that is a really great food
pairing.
You
could manage.
All right, you'll some great insights on food and a little cameo there from Christian Eads. He's promised him he can come back on the show soon. I shall make good on that, Christian. I do assure you. Kwanele, tell me a little bit about vintage and appreciation of that, because although the majority of champagne is non-vintage, we probably do a little bit more as a percentage of bubbles in South Africa, vintage rather than non-vintage. When we do get a vintage, it has a bit more prestige in the eyes of most, and it's something that can be aged for a particular period of time. Where does the vintage vision sit with Khulu? And again, is this something our South African consumers are really interested in, really excited by?
I believe that the consumers are excited by like a MCC vintages. Sorry, getting tongue-tied. I do enjoy a good vintage MCC. I always do. We do have a vintage, a 2020 vintage that we're going to be releasing. Now the cat's out of the bag, Dan. I was going to surprise you with those little news at some other point, but right now, I believe that vintages, the vintage is really important. I know 2020 was an amazing year for a particular winemaker that is very close to my heart, and I love his 2020 vintages. I'm not going to name names, but we are going to be releasing a vintage later this year.
That's really exciting, and it's another milestone. And right at the start, I asked you about some of the challenges. I'm sure that when you have moments like this, Kwanele, when the business takes a step forward like this, it really is a personal pat on the back and a really good reminder of why you're doing what you do.
It really is, Dan. And to add to what Melissa said, bumping into people that are consuming your wine, or you go to the supermarket and you see someone has got a bottle of your wine in their basket, is really a pat on the back. I've had instances where there's a wine tasting event or there's an expo and people will be like, "Hi, Khulu." And for me, that's a huge compliment, because even though they don't know my name, they know my brand and they associate me with the brand. And that is a huge pat on the back. Considering the short time that we have been running this business, I believe that we've made great strides, and we'd like to make even greater strides in future.
It is Cap Classique Day on Sunday, and you've already got 4 brands to pick up on your weekly visit to Norman Goodfellows, so that you're celebrating appropriately on Sunday. But once you've got your Dainty Bess, and you've got your Khulu, and you've got your Pieter Ferreira, and you've got your Genevieve, how about one more? So I'm going to put this question to our quartet of experts, a recommendation for one other bottle of bubbles. And yes, you could go something simple like, some Pieter Ferreira Cuvée Clive, because yes, it is an extraordinary bottle of wine. But let's see if we can push you all into slightly less famous territory, and something we might not have heard of, something that's a little less well known. Melissa, I'll kick off with you. If I am going looking for something and want to discover something that you find has really taken you by surprise in the best possible way over the last little while, what might that be?
Perhaps not small, but it's one of my favorites and was the inspiration for the Genevieve Rosé. It's the Silverthorn Genie. It is beautiful, and it's always my go-to. And when people visit the cellar and they want to know more about where the rosé and how the idea comes about, it's lovely to send someone that way and enjoy South African.
All right, we'll happily add some Silverthorn to the list. It's never a chore drinking Silverthorn bubbles. John Loebscher is masterful at what he does. Kwanele, what about you? And I know you've already referenced your 3 fellow guests and how much you love their work. You obviously do a lot of important research, which I do as well, pouring lots of glasses and enjoying them. What's another bubbles that you found recently that you thought, you know what, this one really gets it for me?
Silverthorn, the Green Man.
It is a Silverthorn Love Fest. They'll be dancing in the streets of Robertson tonight. The Green Man from Silverthorn, also an exceptional example of Cap Classique. Another one to add to your list. Jane, I think, is evicted the less celebrated wine-involved member of the household. I know you get to try a fair number as well yourself, Jane. What in the Eedes Ferreira household has been really cool of late?
Dan, I do luckily get to try quite a lot of nice wine, and bubbly I think is a really amazing category. Apart from my esteemed colleagues who are online with me right now, I think I have to give a bit of a shout out to the sort of OGs, the Pieter Ferreiras and the Simon Suchs, who are making excellent sort of everyday drinking wine. My advice though is to seek out the magnums because they are extra special. It's a different dimension, and I really love drinking them.
As you should. I think that's a really good addition there. A magnum of bubbles. Generally, a magnum is something with great gravitas and ceremony to a magnum, but a magnum full of bubbles, well, that's just glorious, and some great names referenced there as well. One of them was a piece of shameless nepotism in roping in Pieter Ferreira. So let's head to the same direction and to the genius behind the Pieter Ferreira brand. And there's not many homes in South Africa where bubbles will be more closely scrutinized or better appreciated. What in the Ferreira home has really got the two of you excited in the last little while?
Okay, so I'm going to loop back to your question to Jane. We drink Cap Classique champagne, sparkling wine as a wine. So breakfast, lunch, dinner, pairs with everything. I actually have quite a few. I'm a huge John Loebscher Silverthorn fan, particularly the Genie. I'm a big fan of Paul Gerber, so Colmont, and I think with all the changes there, it's going to be very exciting to see what happens coming up from there. I think one of the kind of like secret wines, or not secret, but people don't know, is the Jacques Brouwer from Bon Courage in Robertson. Serious value for money. I'm not quite sure how they do it. Yeah, I've got a long list. I can continue. If you like.
I think we might just have you back on the show. In fact, I think what we probably need to do, Anne, is to have you and Pieter on the show together sometime soon, because I suspect there'll be some terrific stories come out of that. But those are some great examples. And I think that Robertson area, I think, and other brands like Paul René, I do love the work that they do at Bon Courage with the Jacques Brouwer. There are some excellent examples, just as there are coming out of so many other parts of South Africa, and that combines to do exactly what the four of you have done so happily for me this evening, and that is give a really intimate portrait of the success of Cap Classique in South Africa at the moment. You've given us all a very long list of wine on top of your own to go and seek out. John Loebscher would seem to be prominent on that list, but there are plenty more. And I think you've all, in different manners of speaking, confirmed my thoughts at the top of the show, which is that the health of Cap Classique is really uplifting for South Africa at the moment. And just as individually you all do so much for each other by making such great Cap Classique, so as Cap Classique producers, you're doing so much for brand South Africa when these bubbles touch down in different parts of the world and are putting smiles on faces. And I know they do that so consistently. So thank you all very much. Have a wonderful Cap Classique day. A very indulgent one. I've now got 26 bottles lined up for Cap Classique Day, thanks to the four of you, which I'll do my best to get through. I shall look forward to having you all on the show again soon. But for now, thank you so much for joining me and helping Dan Really Likes Wine to celebrate Cap Classique.
Yeah. Cheers.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Enjoy.
So there we go. Kwanele Nyawo from Khulu Fine Wines, Ann Ferreira from Pieter Ferreira-Wines. Should be Pieter Ferreira from Ann Ferreira-Wines next time we have him on the show. Melissa Nelsen with her Genevieve, and the Dainty Bess, Jane Ferreira-Eedes, a quartet of terrific producers who are flying all manner of flags for women in South African wine, for the wine industry as a whole, for the quality of Cap Classique, and giving some really cool insight into not just their own particular brands and stories, but where Bubbles is sitting as a whole in South Africa. And so if you were thinking, well, this weekend, I might open a bottle of champagne, I might toast it, and then I might move on to some still wine with my dinner, and then maybe finish off some more champagne at the end of dinner. Well, let's change a couple of those things. Let's have Cap Classique instead of champagne. Let's have it right the way through dinner and see how the combination of the acid and the wines that have gone in and the balance and the flair and excitement of the Cap Classique can lift dishes into entirely new spaces, and wondrously so. And then make sure that it's something we tell our group of wine drinking friends that if you're not drinking Cap Classique, if you haven't been paying it enough attention, then that's something that certainly needs to change. And Cap Classique Day, well, that's as good a day as any. That's it for this week. A big thank you to my 4 wonderful guests. We'll see you back again next week, fully charged with Cap Classique. If you get a moment, get in touch with us on social media and tell us what you drank on Cap Classique Day. We'd love to know what you had, why you liked it, because I'm sure you will, and what your thoughts are on South African Cap Classique. That does it for today. Dan Really Likes Wine with Norman Goodfellows. We'll see you again next week. Goodbye.